The rain started just after midnight, drumming against the windows of the small duplex on Harriet Street. Margaret Hayes sat at her kitchen table, the eviction notice spread out in front of her like an accusation. 72 hours to vacate. The words blurred as she read them for the fifth time, her reading glasses fogging in the humid October air. She'd paid her rent. Every month for 3 years, on time, even when David's medical bills had eaten through their savings. Even after the funeral, when she'd had to choose between groceries and the electric bill, she'd paid. She had the receipts in a shoebox under her bed, each one carefully filed by date. But Robert Vance didn't care about receipts. He wanted her gone. Margaret was 68 years old. Her hands shook from arthritis. Her pension from the library barely covered rent and medication. Her daughter lived in Oregon with 3 kids and a husband who'd been laid off. There was nowhere to go, no one to call. Just this small duplex that smelled like David's pipe tobacco, even though he'd been gone 14 months. She folded the notice and placed it in the shoebox with the receipts. Then she made herself a cup of tea she didn't want and sat by the window, watching the rain. Across the street, a motorcycle sat under a tarp in the Johnsons' driveway. Their son, she remembered, Army veteran. Came home last year. She'd seen him working on the bike sometimes, methodical and patient. He had kind eyes. David would have liked him. Margaret didn't sleep that night. She watched the rain and thought about packing and wondered where a widow with arthritic hands was supposed to go when the world decided she was taking up too much space. Morning came gray and cold. Margaret made coffee and toast she couldn't eat. At 7, a knock rattled her door. She opened it to find Robert Vance on her porch, his suit expensive, his smile thin. "Mrs. Hayes, just checking that you received the notice." "I received it, Mr. Vance. But there's been a mistake. I paid October's rent on the 1st. I have the receipt." Vance's smile didn't change. "The notice isn't about late payment. It's about property violations, noise complaints, deteriorating conditions. The lease allows me to terminate for cause. I haven't made noise. I live alone, and nothing's deteriorating that The decision is final, Mrs. Hayes. You have until Friday." He handed her a second paper. "That's the formal filing. If you're still here Friday evening, the sheriff will remove you." He turned to leave, then paused. "Nothing personal, just business. This property's been sold to a developer. Empty units are worth more." Margaret stood in the doorway, the paper shaking in her hand, and watched him walk to his Mercedes. He drove away without looking back. Across the street, Kyle Johnson stood in his driveway, the tarp pulled back from his motorcycle. He'd watched the whole exchange. When Vance's car disappeared around the corner, Kyle crossed the street. "Mrs. Hayes, you okay?" Margaret tried to smile, failed. "Just some landlord business, nothing to worry about." Kyle glanced at the paper in her hand. His jaw tightened. "That an eviction notice?" "It's fine. I'll figure something out." "May I?" Kyle gestured to the paper. Margaret hesitated, then handed it over. Kyle read it quickly, his expression darkening. "This says you violated noise ordinances and property standards. Is that true?" "No, I paid my rent. I keep the place clean. I don't understand." Kyle handed the paper back. "I do. Guy's trying to force you out so he can sell without sitting tenants. It's not legal, but it happens." And he paused. "Mrs. Hayes, do you have somewhere to go?" Margaret shook her head. She didn't trust herself to speak. Kyle pulled out his phone. "I'm going to make some calls. Don't pack anything yet, okay?" "You don't have to." "Yes, ma'am, I do. My mom's your age, lives in Florida. If someone did this to her, I'd hope somebody would step up." He was already dialing. "Give me a few hours." Margaret went back inside and sat at her kitchen table. Through the window, she could see Kyle pacing in his driveway, phone pressed to his ear. He made 3 calls, then 4. Then he disappeared into his garage. An hour later, she heard the motorcycles. It started as a low rumble in the distance, growing louder. Margaret went to the window. Bikes were coming up Harriet Street, 6 of them, riding in formation. They parked in front of Kyle's house. Men and 2 women dismounted, all wearing leather vests. The patches said Iron Brotherhood MC above crossed wrenches. Kyle greeted them, talking and gesturing. One of the bikers, a broad-shouldered man with a gray beard, looked toward Margaret's house. Kyle nodded. The man walked across the street and knocked. Margaret opened the door. The biker removed his sunglasses. His eyes were blue and tired and serious. "Mrs. Hayes? My name's Jack Mercer. Kyle Johnson's my nephew. He says you got a problem with your landlord. I don't want to be any trouble, Margaret said automatically. You're not the trouble here, ma'am. Your landlord is. Jack's voice was rough but respectful. Kyle tells me you paid your rent, kept your place nice, and this Vance character's trying to force you out anyway. That about right? Margaret nodded. And you got receipts proving payment? Every single one, going back 3 years. Jack smiled. It transformed his face. Good. That's real good, because what Mr. Vance is doing, that's called constructive eviction. It's illegal, and we're going to make sure he knows it. I can't afford a lawyer, Margaret said quietly. Don't need one yet. Sometimes all it takes is the right kind of pressure in the right place. Jack turned and gestured to the bikers. These are my brothers and sisters from the Iron Brotherhood. We handle situations like this. Make sure people like your landlord understand that their actions have consequences. I don't understand. You will, ma'am. First thing, don't leave this house. Don't pack. Don't sign anything Vance brings you. Second, get those receipts together. Everyone. We're going to need them. Third, sit tight. We're going to pay Mr. Vance a visit. Margaret's hands went to her mouth. You're not going to hurt him, are you? Jack's expression was serious. No, ma'am. We don't operate that way. We're going to talk to him, educate him, help him understand the error of his ways. He smiled again. Peacefully. Within the law. Promise. The bikers spent an hour at Kyle's house, making calls, looking at papers, planning. Margaret watched from her window. At one point, a woman with short gray hair crossed the street and introduced herself as Rita, Jack's wife. She sat with Margaret, drank tea, and listened to the whole story. When Margaret cried, Rita held her hand and didn't say anything about weakness or shame. My husband and I lost our house in 2008, Rita said. Bank foreclosed. We lived in our truck for 4 months while Jack picked up work where he could. Nobody helped us. Nobody stood up. We swore if we ever got back on our feet, we'd do different for others. She squeezed Margaret's hand. You're not alone anymore. By noon, the bikers had an address for Robert Vance. They rolled out in formation, Kyle leading on his rebuilt Harley, Jack beside him. Margaret stood on her porch and watched them go, engines thundering like a storm rolling in. They found Vance at his office in a strip mall on the east side of town. He was locking up for lunch when 14 motorcycles pulled into the parking lot. The riders dismounted slowly, deliberately. They didn't rush, didn't shout, just formed a loose semicircle around Vance's Mercedes, blocking it in. Vance froze, keys in hand. What the hell is this? Jack stepped forward. Mr. Vance? We need to talk about Margaret Hayes. Vance's face went pale, then red. I don't know who you think you are, but you're on private property and I'm calling the police. Please do, Jack said calmly. In fact, here. He handed Vance a business card. That's Deputy Frank Morrison at the county sheriff's office. He's expecting your call. We already spoke with him this morning about your illegal eviction practices. Vance stared at the card. I haven't done anything illegal. Kyle stepped forward. You filed a false eviction notice claiming violations that don't exist. Mrs. Hayes has paid rent on time for 3 years. She's violated no lease terms. You're trying to force her out to increase property value for a sale. He held up his phone. We've documented everything, including the fact that you've done this to 4 other tenants in the past year, all elderly, all on fixed incomes. You can't prove... We can, said another biker, a younger man with a tablet. Public records, court filings, complaints to the housing authority that were never investigated. You've been running this game for 18 months, Mr. Vance. It ends today. Vance looked around wildly. The parking lot had attracted attention. People stood in doorways, watching. A woman had her phone out, recording. What do you want? Vance's voice cracked. Simple, Jack said. You withdraw the eviction notice. You leave Mrs. Hayes alone. You restore her lease with a guarantee of no rent increases for 2 years. And you compensate her for the distress you've caused, $2,000. That's extortion? No, sir. Extortion is threatening harm for money. We're negotiating terms to avoid legal action. Mrs. Hayes has grounds for a lawsuit. Wrongful eviction, elder abuse, intentional infliction of emotional distress. She'd win. You'd pay a lot more than $2,000. Jack's voice stayed level. This is us being generous. I'm not giving you anything. Jack nodded slowly. Okay, Then we file complaints with the Housing Authority, the State Attorney General, and the Bar Association, since you used legal paperwork to commit fraud. We'll also contact the other tenants you've evicted and help them file a class action suit." He paused. "And we'll park outside your house every morning. Right across your driveway, not on your property, so it's legal. Just sitting there, watching, making sure you don't try this with anyone else." "You can't harass me." "We're not harassing. We're observing. Public street, public space. Perfectly legal." Jack smiled. "But I imagine your neighbors will have questions." "Your wife might have questions. Your business partners definitely will." Vance's shoulders sagged. He looked at the circle of bikers, at the phones recording, at the crowd of witnesses. "Fine. Fine. I'll withdraw the notice." "And the rest?" Vance's jaw clenched. "And the rest. 2 years guaranteed lease, 2,000 compensation." "In writing," Kyle added. "Notarized, by 5 o'clock today." "That's impossible. Notary's close at dash. "My sister's a notary," Rita called from her bike. "I'll stay open as late as you need, Mr. Vance." For Mrs. Hayes. Vance pulled out his phone with shaking hands and made a call. 20 minutes later, his lawyer arrived, looking confused and annoyed. The bikers explained the situation. The lawyer, an older woman named Patricia Chen, read through Margaret's receipts, looked at the eviction notice, and turned to Vance with a look of pure disgust. "Robert, what the hell were you thinking?" "I was trying to—" "You were committing fraud." Patricia's voice was ice. "I'm not representing you in this. In fact, I'm resigning from your account effective immediately." She turned to Jack. "I'll draft the withdrawal and settlement agreement myself. No charge. I'll have it ready by 4. "Appreciated, ma'am." Patricia nodded. "For what it's worth." "You're doing a good thing here. People like Robert need to learn they can't bully their way through life." By 5 o'clock, the papers were signed. The eviction was withdrawn. Margaret's lease was extended and locked at current rent for 2 years. The $2,000 check was signed and notarized. Jack tucked the documents into his saddlebag, and the bikers rolled back to Harriet Street in the golden afternoon light. Margaret was waiting on her porch when they arrived. Jack handed her the envelope. "It's done, ma'am. You're staying. He can't touch you." Margaret opened the envelope with trembling hands. She read the withdrawal letter twice, looked at the check. Her eyes filled with tears. "I don't know how to thank you." "No thanks needed. Just promise me something. If you see someone else in trouble and you can help, you help. That's how this works. We all look out for each other." "I promise." The bikers started their engines, preparing to leave, but Rita dismounted and approached the porch. "Mrs. Hayes." "I know today was scary, and you're probably still shaken up. Would you like some company for dinner? Nothing fancy, just so you're not alone." Margaret nodded, not trusting her voice. Rita stayed. So did Kyle. They sat at Margaret's kitchen table and ate chicken soup and cornbread that Rita had brought. They talked about everything and nothing. David and his pipe tobacco, Kyle's time in Afghanistan, Rita's grandchildren in Tennessee. By the time the dishes were washed and put away, Margaret was smiling, really smiling, for the first time in days. When Rita left, she hugged Margaret at the door. "You need anything, you call. Kyle has my number. We're not far." Margaret slept that night. Really slept, deeply and without fear. When she woke, sunlight was streaming through the bedroom window, and birds were singing in the oak tree outside. She made coffee and toast and actually ate it. Then she sat at her kitchen table and looked at the papers Jack had brought her. The eviction was withdrawn. The lease was guaranteed. She could stay. This was still home. She pulled out David's old address book and found her daughter's number. They hadn't talked much since the funeral. The distance felt too wide, the conversations too hard. But Margaret called anyway. "Mom? Is everything okay?" "Yes, honey, everything's okay. I just wanted to hear your voice." They talked for an hour, about the grandkids and the job market and the weather, about small things that didn't feel small anymore. When Margaret mentioned the eviction and the bikers, her daughter went quiet. "Mom, you could have called me. I would have helped." "I know, baby. But you've got your own troubles, and anyway, it worked out. I had help." "Bikers, though?" "Mom, that sounds dangerous." "They weren't dangerous, honey. They were kind. They stood up for me when I couldn't stand up for myself." Margaret paused. "Your father would have liked them." After they hung up, Margaret did something she hadn't done in months. She walked to the end of her driveway and checked the mail. Among the catalogs and bills was a hand-delivered envelope with no stamp. Inside was a card with the Iron Brotherhood logo and a handwritten note from Jack. "If you ever need anything, call. Day or night. Your family now." Margaret put the card on her refrigerator, held there by a magnet shaped like a sunflower that David had given her on their 40th anniversary. Then she made herself lunch and sat by the window, watching the neighborhood go about its day. Across the street, Kyle was working on his motorcycle. He saw her watching and waved. Margaret waved back. The next morning, Margaret woke to the sound of engines. She went to the window and saw them, 20 motorcycles parked along Harriet Street. The bikers were unloading tools and paint cans from a trailer. Jack saw her and crossed the street. "Morning, Mrs. Hayes. Hope we didn't wake you. Got to thinking, you mentioned your porch steps were getting loose. Thought we'd fix them. And that gutter's sagging. We'll take care of that too." He smiled. "Won't charge you, just paying it forward." "You've already done so much." "Not done yet, ma'am. We take care of our own, and you're ours now." They spent the day working, fixed the porch steps and the gutter and the loose window frame Margaret had been worried about, painted the trim, cleaned the gutters. A woman named Diane replanted the flower beds with mums and ornamental kale. By sunset, the duplex looked better than it had in years. Margaret made sandwiches and lemonade for everyone. They sat on the newly repaired porch and ate and talked and laughed. Neighbors came by to watch, curious at first, then friendly. Mr. Chen from 2 doors down brought cookies his wife had made. The Thompsons from across the street invited everyone to their daughter's soccer game on Saturday. When the bikers finally left, the street felt different, warmer somehow, connected. Kyle stayed behind, helping Margaret clean up. "You know they'll be back, right?" "The Brotherhood. They check on people, make sure things stay good." "Why do they do this?" Margaret asked. "They don't know me." "They don't owe me anything." Kyle was quiet for a moment. Uncle Jack's daughter died when she was 16. Drunk driver. He and Rita almost didn't make it through. Said they felt invisible, like the world kept turning and nobody noticed their pain. He picked up a paper plate. So now they notice. They see people who are hurting or scared or alone, and they do something about it. They make people visible again. Margaret understood. For 14 months since David died, she'd felt invisible. The world had kept turning. Bills kept coming. People kept moving. And she'd been here, alone in this small duplex, trying to hold on to something that kept slipping away. But today, she'd been seen. She'd been heard. She'd mattered. That night, Margaret pulled out David's pipe tobacco from the drawer where she'd hidden it after the funeral. She opened the tin and breathed in the scent. It didn't make her cry this time. It just reminded her that she'd been loved once, that she'd mattered to someone. And maybe she still did. Over the next few weeks, life settled into a new rhythm. Margaret still went to the library on Tuesdays, still had her standing hair appointment on Thursdays. But now, she also had coffee with Rita every Saturday morning. She attended a barbecue at the Iron Brotherhood clubhouse and met 20 more people who treated her like family. She even rode on the back of Kyle's motorcycle once, just to the grocery store and back, her arms wrapped tight around his waist, her heart pounding with fear and joy. Robert Vance kept his word. The lease stayed locked. The rent stayed the same. He never contacted her again. Margaret heard through Rita that he'd sold his properties and moved to Florida. Good riddance. The other tenants Vance had evicted heard about Margaret's case. 3 of them called the Iron Brotherhood. Jack and his crew helped them too. Filed complaints, gathered evidence, got settlements. Word spread. Other landlords in the county started thinking twice before they filed questionable evictions. The housing authority started investigating complaints more thoroughly. Small changes, but real ones. On what would have been her and David's 43rd anniversary, Margaret woke to find flowers on her porch. Sunflowers like the magnet. A card from the Iron Brotherhood. Thinking of you today. You're not alone. She carried them inside and put them in David's favorite vase. Then she made coffee and toast and sat at her kitchen table, watching the morning sun paint the walls gold. The duplex was quiet, but not lonely. The world outside was busy, but not frightening. She was still here, still standing, still home. And somewhere out there, on roads she'd never travel, motorcycles were rolling toward the next person who needed help. The next widow or veteran or single parent or frightened kid who thought they were invisible, who thought nobody cared, who thought the world would keep turning and leave them behind. But the Iron Brotherhood would see them, would hear them, would stand between them and the people who thought power meant the right to hurt others without consequence. Because somebody had to, and they'd decided it would be them. Margaret finished her coffee and looked at the card on her refrigerator. The Iron Brotherhood logo, Jack's phone number, a promise kept and a promise given. She pulled out her address book and started making calls. Her neighbor, Mrs. Chen, had mentioned problems with her landlord. The family 3 streets over was struggling with medical bills. The veteran at the VFW hall was facing foreclosure. Maybe Margaret couldn't ride a motorcycle or fix a porch or face down a bully in a parking lot, but she could make calls. She could connect people who needed help with people who gave it. She could be a bridge. David would have liked that. Being useful, being part of something bigger than herself. Margaret dialed the first number. When Mrs. Chen answered, Margaret smiled. "Hi, Janet. It's Margaret Hayes. I think I know some people who might be able to help with your landlord situation. Do you have a few minutes to talk?" Outside, the October sun climbed higher. Leaves turned gold and red and fell like blessings. The world kept turning, but this time, Margaret was turning with it. Visible, heard, connected. And in a clubhouse across town, Jack Mercer's phone rang. He answered to hear Margaret's voice, strong and sure, telling him about Mrs. Chen and the family on Oak Street and the veteran at the VFW. He listened, making notes, already planning. When the call ended, he looked at Rita. "Margaret's got 3 more cases for us." Rita smiled. "Good." We were getting bored anyway. They mounted their bikes and rode out into the autumn afternoon, following the thread of need that Margaret had handed them. 2 more bikers joined them at the clubhouse, then 5 more, then 10. By the time they reached Mrs. Chen's house, there were 20 motorcycles rolling through Millbrook, engines rumbling like promises kept. People came out on their porches to watch them pass. Some waved, some nodded. All of them understood somehow that justice was riding through their town. Real justice, the kind that protected the weak and held the powerful accountable and reminded everyone that cruelty had a cost. The kind that said, "You matter. You're seen. You're not alone." And on Harriet Street, in a small duplex that smelled like pipe tobacco and fresh coffee, Margaret Hayes sat at her kitchen table and smiled. She'd found her purpose again, her way to honor David, her way to turn 14 months of grief and fear into something useful, something good. She pulled out her address book and kept dialing, because somebody had to. And today, that somebody was her. The motorcycles rolled on, the sun climbed higher, the world turned, and this time, it turned toward justice, toward kindness, toward the wild, improbable idea that strangers on motorcycles could change everything with nothing more than solidarity and stubbornness and the refusal to look away. Margaret Hayes was still here, still standing, still home. And now she was part of something bigger than herself, part of a network of people who remembered what it was like to be invisible and had decided, collectively and fiercely, that nobody should feel that way again. The check for $2,000 sat in her bank account, but Margaret never spent it. Instead, she split it 4 ways and gave it to the families the Iron Brotherhood was helping next. Paid it forward, like Jack had asked, turned her salvation into someone else's. And when the question came, when people asked why bikers would care about an old widow, why they'd spend their time and money protecting strangers, Margaret had an answer now. "Because somebody has to," she'd say, echoing Jack's words. And they decided it would be them. And now it's all of us. That's how this works. That's how we survive together. The October leaves kept falling. The world kept turning. And on Harriet Street, in a duplex that was finally truly home, Margaret Hayes poured another cup of coffee and looked out the window at a world that seemed, for the first time in 14 months, full of possibility and light.